Hey everyone, welcome back. Crazy news. Are you ready? This is the last frame I'm officially covering for the Gloom series. I know, right? You never thought it would end. That said, some more Gloom builds may show up unofficially in the future, but generally they won't be the focus of those videos. Now moving on, Nekros Prime. This was a fun one, covered once again by request. I'm probably the last one to the party for this guy, as you probably know by now Nekros with Gloom is nearly invincible. But enough about that. Today I have two Gloom builds to show you, one for normal play and or Steel Path, and, well, one specifically geared towards endless endurance or level cap kind of runs. So let's hop right in. Nekros' one is Soul Punch. This is a minimal CC ability and creates a soul projectile passing out the enemy's back, striking anything in its path. Tagging things with this ability will instantly turn them into one of Nekros' shadows if you kill them within 3 seconds afterwards. Enemies under 25% HP instead are instantly killed, and also become shadows. If your shadow capacity is already maxed, it will instead heal them all to max HP. Wonderful, right? His 2 is Terrify, a CC ability that de-aggroes 20 enemies in a 15-meter radius and causes them to flee, with a 20% armor strip. The number of enemies and strip percent scale with strength, and radius scales with range. The CC length scales with duration. You can stack multiple casts, and each one has their own timer, which lets you strip armor multiplicatively. His 3 is Desecrate, the famous channeled loot ability. Corpses in a radius of 25 meters have a 54% chance of generating extra loot. This ability only cares about range. Efficiency will also affect how much energy it consumes per corpse. The Despoil augment will make it drain HP instead. Each body part counts as a separate corpse, so slash weapons are handy here for cutting them up when it kills them. His 4 is Shadows of the Dead. This summons up to 7 shadows of enemies Nekros or his previous shadows have killed. They respawn with the same level as when killed, but their health, shields, and damage scale with your strength. This ability has a very long cast time. If you are at max shadows, recasting is short and heals them to full HP instead. There's an augment that gives a damage link for each shadow present, reducing the damage you take up to 90%. Shadows naturally take damage over time also, scaling with duration. When shadows are alive and Nekros is tethered, he's immune to knockdowns. Finally, his passive is a health restore, which will have a small but useful effect on our Despoil builds. Based on this, let's take a look at what I did to his kit. So I've chosen to replace his 1 with Gloom. Although Soul Punch can heal his shadows instantly to full, recasting his 4 can already do that, and even though it's long, natural talent is an option. His 2 Terrify is important because it works very nicely with Gloom. It essentially functions like a pacify, stopping enemies from attacking and holds them in place with Gloom slow, although they will slowly turn away, making headshots a bit harder. Melee is fine though. Interestingly, Terrify has very similar range scaling to Gloom, being base 15 meters to Gloom's 16. This means you can CC anything within Gloom's range consistently. His 3 Desecrate is your standard loot ability. We're going to be using Despoil instead to alleviate the energy drain. Gloom has health steal anyways, which will cover the damage Despoil does to you. His 4 Shadows of the Dead serves 2 purposes. In normal play and Steel Path, the damage link gives you an effective 90% permanent damage reductions with its augment, while also drawing aggro away since they have higher threat levels than the player. In lower levels, they take a long time to die and can survive fights easily, making it near permanent damage reduction and soft CC. In higher levels, you will mainly just be using them to keep enemy fire away. So let's take a look at the first build, intended for a regular Steel Path. As usual, we are featuring Growing Power on a Gloom build. I find Nekros has plenty of CC already, so this usually makes Brief Respite unnecessary. Your shadows redirect fire and give you 90% damage reduction. You also have access to Gloom to slow and Terrify to de-aggro your enemies. Gloom and Shield of Shadows like Strength, so we are running Augur Secrets and Umbral Intensify alongside Energy Conversion and Power Drift, letting us hit 183. This is important because 183 with Growing Power reaches 208, which gives you a near capped damage reduction on his shadows, up to 87.4. Slapping Energy Conversion on top of that for a Gloom cast will put you at 258 strength for a 90% slow, and you only need to cast this once. I didn't want to take Transient Fortitude due to the low duration penalizing the HP drain on your shadows. 90% slow is more than enough for normal Steel Path anyways. You may be wondering why I ran neutral efficiency on a Equilibrium Despoil build. This is because I wanted the build to be as brain dead and easy to use as possible so that you don't have to worry about being super aggressive on killing enemies. You will have energy orbs often, so energy conversion is less of a can you proc it and more of a when will you proc it. You're also free to spam Terrify as much as you please. You'll also have health orbs everywhere for equilibrium. Alternatively, you can drop Augur Secrets and Umbral Intensify to run a rank 9 Blind Rage instead. This will save a slot for natural talent if you so choose. But keep in mind that abilities are much more expensive to cast, and Gloom will drain 11.25 energy per second, which forces you to play an extremely aggressive playstyle. 145 range scales decently with Gloom, letting you avoid small arms fire, while also letting enemies getting somewhat close to you before getting bunched up at the edge of the ring. This works very nicely with Terrify, CCing an entire crowd at once when you approach them. For this kit to work, we want to slot Arcane Energize for economy safety. The other Arcane is basically free. Nullifier is unnecessary because energy orbs are everywhere. I prefer to run Strike for my melee. You're also already super tanky due to Gloom's lifesteal and your Shadow's damage reductions. If your shield does break, you have the Augur set bonus on casting Terrify to get yourself to safety. Of course, don't forget about your Decayed Dragon key. Make sure to bring a companion. Because statuses aren't really an issue and Nekros is immune to knockdowns when at least one shadow is present, I would prefer a Panzer Vulpaphyla on this build. Alternatively, you can run a Jinn with Cryotra to spread gas. This is because in either case, you still want to run the Synth Fiber and Synth Deconstruct set. Not only is the set bonus handy for reloading your new core while you melee, but Synth Fiber lets you pick up health orbs even when your health is full, fueling equilibrium. Synth Deconstruct also increases chances of health orbs dropping from enemies when tagged by your sentinel, which is why we're building for gas on Cryotra. So let's take a look at how this plays out. First, we will turn on our Despoil. Then we want to kill enemies until we get enough energy for Gloom to proc Energize. At this point, energy conversion should be active, and with growing power you are ready to go. The Gloom will be a 90.3% slow. Terrify is needed, and kill a couple of enemies so you can get your shadows up. So long as growing power is active when you cast it, 7 shadows should give you 87.4% damage reduction. At this point, all you need to keep an eye on is recasting your shadows every once in a while. There shouldn't be too much incoming damage to yourself. As you can tell, there isn't too much going on enemy-wise with the build. It's mostly just a ton of self-preservation and a mix of soft and hard CC. Your weapons will be pulling the bulk of the weight, but if you really want to, you can cast Terrify a few times for armor strip or if there's too much AoE threats. That said, I would expect you to have decent weapon builds if you're doing Steel Path, so partial armor strip shouldn't really make much of a difference. Now let's take a look at the Endless builds. This one is far more interesting because it depends on map interactions as well and not just his kit itself. The 3 left corner mods in the build have changed, and we're also now running Cunning Drift instead of Power Drift. Efficiency has tanked somewhat, range has gone up, and strength has gone down. We've also dropped Shield of Shadows Augment. Now what exactly is this build trying to accomplish? Well, there are a few misconceptions I need to clear up first. In Endless runs, you will reach a point where enemies will do so much damage it is impossible to survive them by face tanking. For reference, a level 9,999 enemy shooting you even with 99.9% damage reduction, which is very hard to get by the way, will do similar damage to a level 114 enemy shooting you with no damage reduction. So this means no adaptation. Ever try to do Sortie 3 with no adaptation? Well, it's similar to that, but even a little bit stronger. You need about a 99.98% damage reduction or higher to be able to face tank Endless Endurance late in the run. So for this reason, we're looking towards iframes and shield gating instead of Shield of Shadows. If anything, this frees up a mod slot. Now does this mean his 4 is now useless? No, it just serves a different purpose now. Instead of using it as a DR source, we will instead be using it as a pure aggro puller to redirect shots that otherwise would have killed you. The shadows will die in 4 to 5 shots at enemies at such a high level because damage scales much faster than health. For this reason, we're running much higher range than the original build I showed you. Why, you may ask? Well, this freezes any unexpected incoming melee units, but its main purpose is to make sure the only enemies shooting towards you are very far away, typically at the entrance of the tile. By having them that far, aiming at your shadows makes it much less likely that they'll hit you than if they were closer, which may enable crossfires with you between them and the shadow. There is another benefit to higher range Gloom on Nekros though. By encompassing most of the tile, you are locking down aggro to coming mostly only from the entrances, which means you only really have to worry about unidirectional or bidirectional fire if there are 2 entrances that have line of sight on you. It's much easier to avoid being hit this way than if your Gloom Bubble is smaller at level cap with enemies all around outside of you shooting inwards from any angle, because, well, your shadows will draw a ton of fire. You will notice I'm also running lower strength than usual. This is because in Endless I expect shadows to die more often and you will have to use Terrify more. The energy consumption is noticeably higher than the previous build in both cost and frequency of usage. For this reason, I've chosen to complement the build with a primary kit gun with Pax Bolt to sustain an extra 30 strength. This lets us run 65 efficiency instead of 45 while still reaching a 93.8% slow with 190 range. Duration is kept neutral so you don't have an increased health drain on the shadows passively. Although Nekros can technically sustain a 45 efficiency build, for something aimed towards the level cap, I prefer to play by the safer side, especially on a build intended for these kind of runs where running out of energy can have disastrous consequences. Alternatively, you can choose to run a rank 9 blind rage here instead, which will let you cap out the 95% slow without Pax Bolt, but it will drop you to 50 efficiency. For our arcanes, Energize is still the obvious first option to sustain the build. The second arcane I'm leaning towards is Eruption. CC is much more important than immediate outgoing damage in a level cap kind of run because any type of hit can down you. Eruption also has a 30 meter radius, matching nicely with Terrify and Gloom on this build. Now for your companion, you once again have a choice between Jin and Panzerwalpaphyla. I would say if you're uncomfortable with the build drain or running a rank 9 blind rage with a 50 efficiency, I would suggest Jin for the extra health orbs from Synth Deconstruct with Cryotra, otherwise you will get slightly better damage utility out of Panzer's viral spore spread. Together, these elements should allow you to maintain your energy economy easily while retaining the option to spam Terrify or recast shadows whenever as desired. The remaining footage in the video is just showcasing how these builds handle in Steel Path. The first one is the easy mode Braindead 100 efficiency setup that I showed you with Shield of Shadows. As I stated, the first thing you want to do is cast Despoil, then try to stockpile some energy and proc energy conversion. Once you got that going, feel free to cast Gloom. Now you want to kill some enemies a bit so you can set up your Shield of Shadows, and remember you have total knockdown immunity when they are present. You will passively regenerate energy from the sheer amount of orbs you and your Sentinel produce. If you're in a tight spot or see a bunch of enemies you want to CC, just cast Terrify. That's about it for this build. Acolytes aren't really affected by your Terrify, so you're out of luck there. On the other hand, Gloom still retains its full effect on them and they will not build resistance, slowing them to a crawl. It's easy to clean up shop. They will also aggro your shadows, but keep an eye out for violence, as their silence can deactivate all of your abilities. This is now the second build. The Endless build setup with 65 efficiency and a Pax Bolt primary kit gun. The setup method isn't too different, setting up Despoil at first. The higher health drain will be recovered by Gloom, so don't worry about that. You will want to kill enemies for orb drops to proc Arcane Energize and Eruption. You should use your kit gun so you can proc Pax Bolt and Growing Power at the same time, so that you can then cast your 93.8% slow. Kill some more and set up your shadows. Now you're all set. You may or may not need to cast Terrify more often, but keep in mind this build does have Eruption, as I mentioned, to CC anything within Gloom's radius. Later on in the run, you will want to keep an eye on your shadows, recast them if need be. If it's just a heal up, it will be a shorter animation. Acolytes will be no different and will remain easy because they don't scale with the mission over time. Well, that is it. The last of the Gloom series. It was nice being able to close it out with a solid pick like Nekros. I would definitely say over the course of these last few weeks, I've learned a ton about frames I typically never play, and I would say it certainly made me a better player as a whole. Which Gloom frame was your favorite? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or, better yet, subscribe. 76.9% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to give you new information out as always as soon as possible, like I've done with covering the Tempestarii. I'm also preparing to get you the info out first once the Sisters of Parvos mainline drops. You don't want to miss out on any of that. That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.